Welcome again to the Skillwork Forum, where as always we gather to talk and focus kind of on industry trends and issues, challenges facing the skilled trade space. And today we're going to answer the question that we hear pretty often, and it's simply, where are all the workers? Where did they go? Population hasn't decreased, so where are all the workers? So we talk a lot on this podcast about the need for skilled trades, the demand for these skilled trades and all the open jobs we have. We talk about the need for the candidates to be upskilled and to fill these jobs, thousands of open jobs. We got to grow the candidate pool, all these sort of things. But what if I told you that today, as we do this recording, that there are over 7 million with an M, able-bodied men between the ages of 24 and 54, that's prime working years, that are available, but are not currently working and are not even looking for work. 7 million. That, in fact, is the case. There is a strange and frankly, it's kind of disturbing trend that there are millions of able-bodied, I'm talking about men only in this case, millions of able-bodied men are simply not in the workforce and not even looking for work. These men don't even come into the equation of the unemployment figure because those are just folks that are actively looking for work. So they're not counted in these figures. So it's a little bit of a misleading figure. We're going to be quoting a lot from an article and a study by the Milken Institute. According to that, in 1960, that's not that long ago, 97% of men between the ages of 25 and 54, the same age group, and if you expand that a little bit, between the ages of 20 and older, 86%. So nearly 8 in 10 or 9 in 10 of every able-bodied man was working, had a job. Today, the proportion of adult males who do not work is higher than almost any time in our history, and certainly since these statistics were tracked. Here's another quote. At least 1 in 9 men between 25 and 54 years old, and 1 in 5 between their early 20s and mid to late 60s are not working at all. That's 3 times the comparable figure from 1960. That is a significant issue, and the deal is nobody's really talking about this. And the number is actually even higher than 7 million. We're going to talk about that today, Brett.
It's a crazy thought, and to Tim's point, I mean, I've had many conversations coming through the pandemic and whatnot, it'd be like, like you said, where are all the workers? Where'd the people go? What happened? Kind of a thing. It's like there's this confusion, and then I don't think it's intentionally misleading, and it doesn't matter who's in the White House. They calculate the numbers the same way on the unemployment numbers, but we hear it consistently because it's the politically right thing to say. Unemployment is historically low. Current numbers show it at 3.5%, which is historically low. What it doesn't tell you, which is a really interesting part, and I think the value in having this conversation is we begin to try to understand kind of the reasoning behind it. And so, Tim, you just said it a minute ago. The reason why that number is a bit misleading is unemployment numbers are calculated based on only individuals, men and women in this case, and for that number, who are out of work and have actively looked for a job in the prior month. So if you've checked out, if you've decided I'm not actively looking anymore, but you're not working, you're not in the number. So that's how all of a sudden you can, historically, if we go back, Tim was being nice to both him and I when he said the 60s wasn't that long ago. If you go back, it didn't affect the numbers as much, because most people were working.
Yeah, it was a pretty accurate indicator. Yeah. Today, not so much.
Yeah, so now it's almost like you'd have to challenge the way we look at the number based on the number of people. So you got millions that are not factored into that number. They're not working, they're not looking, which is 11% of the core working age group, the thing, what is it, 25 to
24 to 54.
20, yeah. So that group, which clearly able-bodied, typically, obviously exceptions to everything, as I say, great on the curve, And so, but in the middle of that, the majority are. So if you add in the number that's even maybe a little more frightening, if you add in the underemployed, part-time, in school, incarcerated, or freelancing or doing gig type work, the number is closer to 20 million.
20 million.
Yeah, which is just, I mean, it's a crazy number. It begins to answer the question of where are the people? Well, they're not working. That's where they are, or they're not working consistently,
At full capacity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, 20% of that group, they claim some form of disability, because you kind of ask, well, why? What are they, what are they doing, kind of a thing. But so they're receiving some form of assistance, most likely government assistance. 2/3 of nearly 4 million disabled men in the age bracket, they're not working at all. So they're either claiming full disability or some level of disability, which may make them, part-time or whatever.
Yeah.
You do have instances, we've seen this, Tim, we've been involved in it directly, where many took advantage of the pandemic or COVID era policies, and they took early retirements. This was in our space, the skilled trade space. This was, we've been studying these numbers for some time now about the number of baby boomers who were going to be leaving the workforce in the skilled trades to the millennials and Gen Zs that were coming behind them to fill it. Well, one of the things that we always talk about that accelerated that reality, they were projecting that to happen over a 5, 7, 10-year period. Well, when COVID happened, a lot of those people that they thought, well, they'll work another 3, 4, or 5 years. When a lot of those things happen, and then there was subsidies that were given, they basically got paid not to work, and they just never returned. And so they were going to retire, they just ended up retiring earlier. And then other cases, which we'll talk about here in a little bit more in a minute, people, once they got out of the workforce, they just haven't gotten back into it. So.
Yeah, exactly. So, that kind of captures the statistic and the number and a little bit of the why. But what we're really going to get into and what led us down this path, this topic, the questions that come to mind. So we're going to answer today probably what you're thinking of. Number one, well, what are they doing with their time? What are they doing? How do they make ends meet? That's another one. And the next one is, well, why aren't they looking for work? Mm-hmm. That's going to be that's a more debatable topic, but we're gonna dive right in. Number one, what are they doing with their time? These guys at 20 million-ish that aren't working. Well, sadly, not a whole lot, to be honest. This is not my opinion, Brett's opinion. This is not like get off my lawn, old guy. This is statistics that were taken from, and many of these things quotes from this very well-researched article, Milken article, that you'll have the ability to get to when we put this podcast out. Here's a quote from that. Non-employed men, so what are they doing with their time? So these guys that aren't employed spend 9.5 hours sleeping. I can't remember the last time I had 7 hours, frankly, that's fine. I don't need that. But 9.5 hours every day sleeping, 6.5 hours in leisure activities. Of that leisure activities, about 3.5 hours are watching TV. Well, then you say, well, maybe they're, and I thought this, well, they're stay-at-home dads, role reversal. They're watching the kids while their partner is working. And in our case, partner means their wife is working. So maybe that's what they're doing. They're watching the kids. Well, sadly, that's not the case either. Here's a further quote. So these non-working men spend only minutes per day, not hours, but minutes, just almost the same, minutes a day more caring for their kids, cooking and cleaning than men with full-time jobs. So they're not doing that. They're not taking the load off raising the kids and the family. As a matter of fact, they're filling up large swaths of their life doing leisure activities, TV, video games, etc. The Milken study found, they did these time use studies where, track your time throughout a period of time or a week, showed that, here it is, the typical day of a male non-worker looks very much like that of you and I on our off day. So think of your best off day, Brett, like the Saturday. And even then, we tend to do stuff, right? But think of that Saturday. That's what they do all the time. Is that mind-blowing? I mean, to me, I can't wrap my head around that. But that's what they're doing with their time, not much. So the next question then, Brett, is, well, they got to eat.
Yeah.
How do they make ends meet?
The obvious question, like you said, was, well, okay. You kind of asked the question in two ways, because you're like, maybe they've figured out something I haven't. So maybe, how are they making it?
How do I get that gig?
Yeah, I'd probably go crazy, but that's a different story. We'll get into that in a minute in the value of work. But so just under 25% are supported, by their spouse, or if they're living with someone, about a quarter of them, somebody else is providing that level of support. And we're talking about just men here in this case. And so a fraction, probably a very small fraction are living off of money inherited or from a more prosperous time of their life. So, hey, maybe they made a killing in the stock market, back, when the stock market was doing a little better than it is today. And they've made so much that they're literally, they've afforded themselves the ability to play golf every day, if that's what they choose to do. But that's a very small group.
Yeah, I was thinking, like, I'm a prior military guy, retired after 25 years in the military. I know some guys that they got out of the military, they invested, smartly, and they just downsized, and they're done. So there's that there, but it's a small fraction.
Yeah, small amount. So the reality is most depend on some level of charity, whether it's private, as you would expect. Most is from government support, and so it's this article, I believe the Millikan article, talk about up to half of the non-working, this 25 to 54-year-old male head of household are on, now remember they're 25 to 54, so they're on Medicaid. They're collecting Social Security, disability insurance, or both, and about 2/5 are on food stamps or some type of additional support. And so, you can be cynical in that. You could look at that and go, well, okay, what's the big deal? Maybe they need the support. Maybe they do. I'm sure, just like the ones that worked really hard and made a bunch of money, it's a small fraction. It's probably the same on the other side of that. That yes, that support is there for some of them who truly need all of that. And so the impact, the larger economic impact of what this is creating, is today this problem is here. It's creating more shortage in the workforce. We don't have enough workers to fill a lot of the jobs. You go into a restaurant today and they tell you, hey, we can't seat you for another hour, but you're looking over there, you see there's 10 empty tables. Well, it's because they don't have anybody that can wait on the tables. Yeah, and but whatever.
Closed, we just have drive-through only. That's the reason.
All of those kinds of things, and obviously in the more skilled side too. But the larger economic impact is these individuals, they have no savings, they have no retirement funds, they're not building any kind of wealth. So they are creating a dependency on assistance that I don't know if we're paying a whole lot of attention as to what that's going to look like downstream on our economy. We're going to talk about the impact in the GDP.
Yeah, we're going to talk about some of that, but it is huge. Yeah. Yeah, it is, and a significant impact to our society. So, by the way, I want to continue. This is men, and this is looking at our country, America, although I suspect this goes across others. This is here, at home. This is us. So the third question is, well, why? Why wouldn't they look for work? I mean, to you and I, that just seems like crazy, but there's a significant number, as these statistics bear out. It's upwards of 20 million. Why aren't they looking for work? So I can tell you that is a widely debated, if you will, and people are just looking at it, and sometimes it becomes politically charged or socially charged. And we just looked at the research, and we looked at all spectrums, and these are some of the reasons why smarter people than us are saying that these folks are not looking for work. So the first one then is They're underskilled for the jobs that are available for what they consider decent paying jobs. So they want a certain level of living, and a lot of that living has been propped up. So for them to be able to replace what's been propped up with a job, to be able to get that, they don't have the skills or don't think they have the skills. They're not willing to take a lesser role. They're not willing to take a job that pays less and work up to that skill because their social standing is so tied to what they do for a job. And so we've reached a point in our culture where it's socially more acceptable to be out of work than it is to be tagged with a moniker that I'm taking a lower end job. Over time, their earning power and their skills are eroded to the point where now, they see that it's getting further and further away for them to get a job that can augment what they think they need to make today. So that gap just continues to widen. That's one of the reasons, underskilled.
I think we all learned, Tim, that's called the Cousin Eddie syndrome. He's holding out for management.
That's right. Cousin Eddie is holding out for management. In his case, he is underemployed, and somebody should hire him. Very creative thinker, Cousin Eddie from Christmas Vacation.
Christmas Vacation, yeah. If you don't know that, then shame on you. So the other, reality is many lost their jobs, during earlier recessions. If you go back to '08, you can go back to other times. And then the COVID era shutdowns. And so the reality for a lot of individuals is the longer you're away or the longer that you're out of the workforce, it is harder to return. And so little by little, it's always kind of been a thing, for years and years and years, as long as we've probably, I've been in business, and I'm sure the same for you, Tim. If you look at a resume and you see a work gap, it always creates a question, And so if you're that person with the gap, it just little by little, you've just kind of disconnected yourself, and you just, they stay away.
Stay away. Yeah. So here's maybe the more deeper kind of reasoning why they aren't looking for work and the impact. So the motivation to work has been taken away by well-meaning government and charitable support. So you take the motivation to work when you provide subsidy, in a lot of cases well-meaning, but there is something intrinsic. We believe we were created by God with an innate desire to work. And there is a great book by an author we like a lot called, his name is Mr. Tim Keller. Many of you may know him. He has a book called Every Good Endeavor. I encourage you to look at that if you want to get a perspective of what work looks like from a biblical God perspective. But he also does a lot of study over time and talking about a lot about this phenomenon. But he says, listen, whether you're a biblical thinker or whether you're just a sociologist, completely agnostic, this thing, it still holds true. Without meaningful work, this is a quote from that book, we sense a significant inner loss and emptiness. People who are cut off from work because of physical or other reasons quickly discover how much they need to work to thrive emotionally, physically, and spiritually. And the longer they're away from that, and this is not the quote, this is me, but I can tell you from reading the book, the longer they're away from that, something dries up within them. And that's what's going on here. So work feeds the deepest part of our being. Without it, we lose our self-esteem and our self-worth. And that's just simply a fact. And you can see it all around.
Everybody knows when you meet another person, especially male to male, man to man, what's one of the earliest questions you ask? What do you do?
What do you do?
And so that it, like you said, it's built into us. It's innate in the way we're created that you find that level. Now, obviously, some people take work to an unhealthy extreme, the other side, but the other side of the unhealthy is now you've just taken work out of the equation, and this doesn't end well when you're a workaholic, and this isn't going to end well when, I don't know what the right term is for work absence, I guess.
Yeah. So this idea of Brett, if I give you $100, you don't have to do anything, and I say I need you to come over here and work for me, but I'm going to give you $90. that dog won't hunt. That doesn't make
Right.
sense. So the idea that I'm going to give him something and expect somehow that's going to motivate him to want to work, that's just not how we're wired. Now, if I say, I'm going to give you $100, but the expectation is you're going to do X, Y, and Z for it. And, there are those that propose that there are strings attached to government subsidies which require you to work. And of course, I get the perspective that, well, what about this and what about that and all the reasons why, and they're well-intentioned, but I'm telling you, we are killing off generations of our male workforce by taking away the gift of work, and that's what it is.
We talk a lot about, not we don't, and typically in these podcasts, but as a country, we talk about the destruction of the family, and we talk about whether it's crime, whether it's all these different things. This is feeding into that. This is a destruction of the family, loss of traditional roles of a hardworking father. I mean, I'm 59 years old, and I'm blessed that my father is still alive, but he instilled in things in me, whatever, long time ago now, that I still remember today. My dad would say, if I ever said, I'm not feeling good, he'd say, get up and go to work, you'll feel better. And it just became, I was like, I don't know if that's true, but it's what he says. So I guess, but he was instilling this pride in your work and
Work ethic.
and a work ethic in there. And so you're at risk now with what we're talking about of that generational. You're going to risk losing that generational, standard that gets set. And so work ethos, as we say, is not being passed down, when you have generations of non-working role models. And so, we see it in a variety of things. And so, we're losing a little bit of the stigma of being unemployed, that it used to be, a badge of honor. I mean, you would have felt that. I think there is a little bit too, Tim, because, like we said, every strength has a backsided weakness, we often say, and if you think about some of the gig opportunities, nothing against at all of being an Uber driver. I appreciate it. Put on my phone, they come and get you, they take you. But a lot of, not just Uber, but a lot of those different types of things, it kind of allows you a way to be unemployed without really saying you're unemployed, because you're just kind of doing these gigs, to make ends meet, or to appear to be engaged in the workforce a little bit. So we've kind of created, like you said, we've kind of made it easier to be less employed.
Yeah, and I mean, I know personally a lot of people that do those gig jobs in addition to
Yes.
or with multiple other jobs. So I don't know what the stats are, but I would be willing to bet that the majority of those that do Uber Eats and deliver packages part-time for Amazon have full-time jobs, and they're doing extra work. I don't know what that statistic is, but I would be willing to bet that it's pretty high ratio. The destruction of the family, is doing a lot of things negative to our, our whole culture. But this is one of them. I don't have that guy to look up to anymore. And I'm like you, Brett. My dad's still alive. I'm blessed by his work ethic. He instilled it in me. When I go to my mom and dad's to help around the house, I mean, it's all I can do to keep him from climbing up on a ladder and getting on the roof. And he's 85 years old. He does not know how not to work. And he passed that on. And I respect him for it. So there's some other reasons, and we didn't kind of look at the in depth on all these, but I want to be fair. These are some other reasons that were noted for reasons why that people aren't working. So there's a growth in the female workforce. So they've got more jobs. They're filling more jobs and ably. So there's that. That's definitely part of it. There's the rise of global trade and the exporting of jobs overseas. So some of the jobs aren't there. They're traditionally were held by entry-level folks learning a trade. Increased automation, we've talked about a lot. That's also eliminating some jobs. I would say that increased automation is because the workers aren't there in a lot of cases, but that in fact is feeding less and less jobs. I just heard recently there's a 100% fully automated McDonald's, and they're going to McDonald's restaurant. They're going to open more. Not a single person in there. Drive through, you walk in, everything is done by robotically and automation. That's kind of scary. The decline of unions. So the unions had their place in time, and we can argue about whether that's come and gone or whether they've, kind of made some poor decisions on some of the things they've done. We think the unions have a great place and champions of skilled tradesmen, but the decline of unions in general has also prevented a lot of men from going to those unions and getting union jobs. And the other thing I want to just hit on this is this glorification, a cultural thing, of the ultra-rich, the celebrity, the athlete, the music star out there, that people are enamored with that. They spend all their time on TV and social media looking at these people, and they say, that's success. So if I can't have that, then I don't want anything else. So they live in a fantasy world that is the only thing that equals success. And the idea of working your way up or having a middle-class job is no longer an important thing. Doesn't take much imagination to think about how this is going to affect our country in the event that we have a true challenge. And the culture right now, and primarily the lower end of this workforce, has never faced a serious, significant challenge. Actually, it's 24 to 54. Never really faced a challenge like our forefathers have. So I'm not quite sure how we're going to respond as a country. So
no, it's a huge deal. Like you said, it is interesting, Tim. I don't know if it's just because it's not politically beneficial, to factor that into the unemployment numbers or to talk about how we're going to manage through this. But we mentioned it a few minutes ago, the impact on the overall, GDP of the country, the growth, the growth numbers. And so, it's estimated that 20 million non-working. So we talked about, if you add them all up, some are in school, some are incarcerated, some are, under or part-time or type of thing. And then there's the 7 million. But if you take the total number of the 20 million, it's estimated that has an impact of about $1 trillion on the GDP. And so, just based on the fact that labor's share of output, is around 60%. So, I mean, these are economically, this is a massive impact. If you we're never going to get to 100%. A portion of that 20 million is obviously, some of them can't be in the workforce. Some are truly disabled. Some are incarcerated. And you have all these things. But if you just got back, I think, Tim, you mentioned, I think in the 60s, it was like 94%. And then, if you just got back to those levels of kind of what we would consider to be normal, levels of the non-working, just that would increase the GDP, by $750 billion. And so it's a huge boom to the economy. And the reality is what it is. Forget the boom side. It's a drag, down that. So it's part of the reason why we have, one of the many reasons that we have the amount of debt that we have, which is an insane number as well as a country. But it's because we've created this dependency and we're allowing it to continue and to grow.
Yeah.
And with that, so the only thing you can do is just continue to, drop money out of helicopters.
Yeah. So, sadly, these trends appear to be continuing, and we're not going to look at this through rose-colored glasses, but we think there are things we can do about it. We believe in taking action and doing what you can, not just wallowing in, the facts of a declining culture from this perspective. So what can we do about it? How can you as an employer or in the skilled trades, and you need this help, how can you tap into this pool to help close the skills trade gap? So to bring it back to our normal focus in this, well, listen, we can't give you the 5 steps to do this, to tap into this 20 million. There's no magic wand, no single solution. If there was, people would be talking about it. But what we have discovered is that many of the things we talk about on this podcast and other areas of the workforce apply to this. Flexible work schedules, so part-time options to allow an on-ramp for some of these employees to come on, and a training opportunity, even 4-day work weeks. Now, I know you're saying, well, that's just continuing to coddle, but you got to be creative and think about the idea is like we're trying to tap into this. While we can't necessarily solve all the socioeconomical issues, if you want to tap into that, look for opportunities to provide training, upskill to close the gap, provide some advancement to a level where they're going to have some self-esteem, provide the benefits, including mental and behavioral health support, as well as creative child care support. In a lot of cases, that's the issue. Competitive wages that get those guys attracted to at least above what they're getting for doing nothing or little, and focus on making their work something meaningful. Press into that to make sure that you tap into the innate desire we have to be involved with something meaningful, and put your work out there as saying, hey, you know, like the Marine Corps used to have an ad a while back, one of the most highly effective ads ever. It says, the few, the proud, the Marines. That was it. And what did that do? It allowed people to go like, I want to be part of something that is unique, and I can be proud of. I want to be this idea. While we're not suggesting go join the Marines, we are saying tap into that. There's something there. God created us for that. So recognize this too, and this is not a political, this is just a smart business. We cannot continue to support government and private sector subsidies that are, although well-intentioned, are not the answer in a shotgun approach. When you start hearing we are going to invest in, and it comes from somebody in the government, there is no such thing. They are spending, and for the most part, they're spending money, and I'm going to get on my soapbox here. They're spending money we don't have, okay? Take a look at the deficit. And they're spending money and they're subsidizing, and it is a near-term assuaging and manipulating people in order to stay in power. And shame on you politicians that do that. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. So, but if you're the one supporting them by voting them, and Brett, if you want to tell them to edit this out, they can, but I'm telling you, all you're doing is numbing the pain. You're just numbing the pain. So the best thing we can do is change the narrative.
Yeah.
We've talked about this a lot. We got to change the narrative. That's one of our core values. Respect, bring value to some of these jobs in the skilled trades.
Yeah. Well, you know, we're never going to back down from speaking the truth. We're not pointing the finger at one side or at any in particular people. The reality is you need to deal with reality, and that we seem to have a hard time as a country, you know, wanting to do that. And you know, usually we're just trying to solve the skilled trade problem. Today we're trying to solve the world's problems.
We don't want to offend people, right?
So, but here's a good piece of news. You know, we just did recently a full podcast. We had a guest on, Stephen Robertson, wrote a book, The Aliens Among Us. And the good part about that, you know, the title is a little provocative, you know, kind of a thing. But what I took away, and I know Tim took away from that, is I heard hope in the Gen Zs.
I did too.
You know, not taking anything away from whatever millennial and Gen Y, I think it is, or whatever it is, Gen X and stuff. But the Gen Z, you know, which would have been, you know, people that are born right around the mid 90s to 2012, I believe it is, something like that. And so they're now the group that's entering into the workforce, and they're attracted to being mentored, to learning new skills, and I think the really important part, achieving personal and professional growth. So they're much more action oriented. So I think there's a lot of hope in that. Now we got to provide them the opportunities. You know, as Steve said, they're not going to change. We're going to have to change. This is the way they're wired, and so But I think as employers and as a country, in this case, you know, if we can embrace and provide them that opportunity, I think it's a big deal. You know, at Skillwork here, you know, we're focused on changing the narrative, motivating that next generation and the one that's going to come after them. I believe it's called the Alpha or something, and providing exciting opportunities for growth and training. And so, this is something I think, our company's, coming up on about 5 years old. And I think one of the things, we feel that we were called to our business. If you've listened to very many of our podcasts, that our number one value is to honor God in everything we do. So we feel we've been called to a purpose. And part of that I think is continuing to be defined for us is this narrative that we have to have a role at Skillwork in changing that narrative, that we've got to provide different paths, different opportunity. It can't be all this way or all this way. And so we would ask you, collectively, join us in that mission in changing that. I'll plug out to what Charlie Kirk's doing at Turning Point USA in that, because he definitely got a much bigger audience and is way ahead of us in that, in just recognizing that we've got to change that narrative of different opportunities for different individuals.
Yeah, so good point. And, Charlie Kirk, too, and what he's trying to do to change the narrative. And last time I looked at the metrics between us and Charlie Kirk, we have 5 million followers.
Together, yes, we
together.
do.
So we appreciate Charlie helping us out with that. And
I'd like to think of it the other way.
Yeah.
I think we got him those 2 he needed.
Yeah, So what little we can do, we're willing to do, and we ask you to do the same thing. So this is a big deal. And here's the thing. Nobody's talking about it. Nobody's talking about it. You should ask yourself why that is, and maybe get a little bit more educated. Hopefully we've tickled that a little bit today. So as we wrap up this edition of the Skillwork Forum, we remain hopeful despite all these headwinds. Because to be honest with you, we do place our confidence in something greater, far greater than us, who's got it all figured out. We put our faith in a God who understands all these. He's not surprised by all these things. We trust him. But we also believe that we are called to be action-oriented and men that work. So we invite you into that as well. Until next time, thanks for joining us on the Skillwork Forum. Shout out to our friends, Roy Crush and his buddies that run Texas Boys Outdoors. It is a show on the Pursuit channel. You can look at it on YouTube, Texas Boys Outdoors. They focus on military, first responders, special needs kids. They get them out in the great outdoors, and we're proud to be a sponsor of that show. And also our other podcast that we support at Skillwork called The Proud Skill Worker. Go take a look at it as well. You can get it the same platforms that have this podcast. It's from the perspective of you, the skilled worker out there. So until next time, thanks and God bless.